Probably one of the most common complaints that I see regarding Elden Ring is the idea that the open world nature of Elden Ring is going to make it empty and boring.
It's so boring!
That the map is going to be filled with large, scenic set pieces, but that the areas between these points of interests will be sparse, and people will spend a lot of time on their horse, not doing anything other than getting from point A to point B. Just for an example, here's one of the concerned commenters. My concern is that the game looks rather empty. I'm worried they've gone for a larger scope without actually filling that space and might dilute the experience because of it. Here's another one. Graphics still don't hold up, and I guarantee there are going to be more empty, void of meaning areas in this game while running from place to place, which has never been a problem in other Souls games. And let me just do one more to cement the idea. The game looks like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. They were going to be open world, but not really. Looks like there are going to be a lot of places that will be empty, they trying to make the map look big when it's not, just full of empty area, nothing to do. Okay, I think you get the idea. Now the thing is, I think this is actually a very legitimate complaint. Or at the very least a very valid concern for Souls players. One of the main reasons that people praise Dark Souls is their excellent level design. And so it's not unreasonable that Souls players would become a little worried that the open world nature of Elden Ring might take away from that. I'm not really shocked at the idea that people that like Dark Souls might not like the spatial padding that open world games are known for. And this emptiness that they're talking about is a very real and common problem. Even some of the very best open world games have it, including Breath of the Wild. Now before I talk any more about Breath of the Wild, let me just put in all the usual caveats. Breath of the Wild is a masterpiece. I love Breath of the Wild. Everybody loves Breath of the Wild. One of the best games of all time. However, it does have two major problems that stem from the issues that we're discussing here. And I think it would be useful for this discussion to compare how Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring design their open world maps, and then how they incentivize players to go out and explore those open world maps. First of all, let me clear up what causes exactly this feeling of emptiness in these open world games. Because it's not just when there's not much to do along the way to your destination. A more serious problem is that when you do get to the destination finally, there wasn't anything there that was worthwhile. Now, Breath of the Wild suffers from both of those problems, and they actually compound each other in interesting ways. You see, Breath of the Wild dealt with player incentivization by making your weapons destructible. They gave each weapon a set durability, and as a result, an expiration date. This causes a situation where the player always needs new weapons, because just the simple act of exploring and doing combat is going to use up the loot that you already have, so the weapons become the loot. And the problem with this situation is that it makes each encounter that you could get into low value, and you know that ahead of time, partially because you're expending loot to get loot. For example, if you're walking along the road and you see a group of enemies and you see that they have a chest, you have to make the calculation of whether you think it's worth it to expend the durability of your current weapons to potentially get the weapons that those enemies have, and if that plus whatever's in the chest is going to make up for the durability that you've used up. And oftentimes the answer that you come up with is no, because you know that that chest probably has some arrows or some bomb arrows or some material that you already have 20 of. And even if the chest has something really great, a really good weapon, that weapon has limited utility, because eventually it's going to get destroyed. So Breath of the Wild has a low player incentive for exploration. And this often causes the feeling of emptiness to not just be limited between traveling from one place to another. The actual possible destinations are also contributing to the feeling of emptiness because people feel like their rewards are not worth it. This is a problem for pretty much all open world games. They all have to figure out how much space to put between the player and his destination, what to fill that space with, and then what to present the player with once they get to the area that they're trying to get to. Okay, so now let's compare how Elden Ring decided to deal with the same problems. First, let's address what those commenters were worried about at the beginning of the video. How much empty space is there between points of interest? How much traveling do you have to do to get to where you're going? And the answer to that is based on my experience with the Elden Ring closed network test. And based on that experience, there's very little empty space. In fact, if the rest of the game is comparable to the network test, Elden Ring is looking like it's going to be the most dense open world I've ever played. And when I say dense, I mean dense. You cannot go very far without getting to somewhere interesting. I was trying to think of an equivalent example based on another game, and the only thing I could come up with was, again, Breath of the Wild, but only in its opening stage. In the part of the game where you're stuck on the Great Plateau, the place serves as a kind of tutorial area where it introduces you to all of these mechanics. And as a result, you can tell that this place is a lot more handcrafted than the rest of the game. The points of interest are closely packed together, and it's filled with the kind of opportunities and obstacles that you're going to be dealing with the rest of the game, all condensed into a small area. Breath of the Wild doesn't have long periods of travel between locations until after you get the paraglider and you leave the Great Plateau. At that point, the developers know that you have access to this tool that can allow you to fly and go through large expanses of space with little issue. And because they know that, and because you know that, a whole swath of the map becomes flyover country. And so to me, playing the network test, Elden Ring felt like Breath of the Wild before you got the paraglider. The areas that we got to explore felt as well crafted and closely packed as the Great Plateau. Now obviously I don't know if that's going to be the case for the entire game. After all, even Dark Souls, a game that is, heralded for its excellent level design, slacked off a bit towards its later half of the game. A lot of the areas after Ornstein and Smough were mediocre at best, particularly Izalith, but really none of the later half areas ever matched the quality of the areas in the first half. But if we're making assumptions about Elden Ring based on what we've seen is exactly the opposite of what these commenters are concerned about. The available evidence suggests that the game is not only not empty, but it's actually one of the least empty games I've seen in this open world genre. And not just because of the distance between things, but because the actual things that you get once you get to your destination are worthwhile and valuable. And you see, Elden Ring has a lot of innate advantages over Breath of the Wild in that regard. Because first of all, if you're like me, and you're a lore enthusiast, then pretty much almost all the items have inherent value. You want all of the spells, even if you're not going to use them. You want all of the equipment and the armor and the weapons, simply so that you can read the item description. And so a lot of these items have an inherent value outside of their immediate utility. But interestingly enough, even in terms of that utility, the rewards for exploration in Elden Ring are much more valuable than they are in most games. For example, in something like Ghost of Tsushima, exploration would be rewarded with something like a bit of progression towards a minor upgrade. But in Elden Ring, every discovery that you make has the potential to radically change how you're playing the game. They're not just minor upgrades all the time. You might find the equivalent of what a Ghost of Tsushima minor upgrade is, or a Korok seed from Legend of Zelda, and stuff like that would be the smithing items that you can use to upgrade your weapons. But you might also find a whole new weapon that you like. And these weapons aren't always strict upgrades from what you're using. You might simply just like it better and decide to switch to this new weapon. And that in turn is going to change how you're approaching the game. And actually that's less dramatic than the change that would happen when you find a really good new spell that you like. If you incorporate this new spell into the spells that you're already using heavily, then it could dramatically change how you play even more than just having a new weapon. There's also stuff like armor and talismans, which is less dramatic of an impact to how you're playing, but still very valuable. And finally, there's the big one, which is the Ashes of War system. These are kind of like weapon arts that you can equip to your weapons, and they also affect how your weapons scale, and with what stats. Because which Ash of War you can equip to different weapons is left to the player's discretion, they're highly desirable and immediately useful. And like weapons and spells, they have the potential of changing how the player is playing the game. And because they have all of these qualities, they are useful for longer, even into the late game. In Breath of the Wild or Ghost of Tsushima or any other game, unless you're a completionist, you're less likely to engage with those Mongol encampments or those monster encampments, because the rewards that you're getting are probably just not useful to you at this point in the game. And so you're continuing to play and explore simply for the joy of playing and exploring, simply because you like the combat, and you like the exploration, and you like the atmosphere, and you like going to places. But in Elden Ring, exploration rewards will keep their value longer, So you'll still be going to places because you like the atmosphere and you like exploring and you like how the combat works, but you'll probably also be going to those places because you want the thing that's there. Because a new Ash of War could be really neat, and a new spell always has the potential to be awesome. And that will remain true no matter how close to the endgame you are. So while I definitely understand where this open world hesitancy concern is coming from Souls players, and I do think those are reasonable concerns to have, because yes, a lot of open world games have that problem, the problem of emptiness in one way or the other. I also think that this is the kind of concern that could only come from people that didn't play the closed network test. Because the fact that the open world is so dense, compact, and rich with content is immediately apparent to anyone that did play it. And so, like I said, while it's possible that this could be a problem deeper into the game, further down the line, there's nothing in the materials available that suggests that that's going to be the case. What we've seen doesn't point to the idea that Elden Ring is going to be empty and boring. It points to it being awesome and cool. And by that I mean dense, and full of high-quality incentives for the player to explore. And that's the end of this video. Please be sure to unsubscribe and unclick the bell notification. As always, thank you very much for watching.